the way that I have thought to frame this is really to use primarily, not only, but primarily my hat as a member of the working board um, of the RRBM, which is obviously the hosting organization, and I've decided to expand a little bit the framing that I had given originally, precisely because I wanted to start from what I think is one of the fundamental questions that particularly an institution like RRBM should pose itself, but also exists in a way to at least tackle. And it is, as you will see, also in a way positioned as of today unequivocally in a unique way to provide some of the answers. But as you will see also, even RRBM is not cannot obviously provide all the answer to this foundational question. The way I'm going to be a bit provocative, obviously, on the both the problem that I have identified, essentially the responsibility of our community as business scholars in a world that we are all living. They use now this interesting expression of polycrisis, so that, in one word, one can summarize all the various dimensions of global challenges, right? That's another expression that is very, very much, and in fact, increasingly utilized also in the literature. So with all these global challenges, we tend to maintain our position to observers and scholars for observers of business behavior, which is absolutely fine, of course. There's nothing wrong with that. What may be useful, however, is to recognize that we're also part of the problem. We as business researchers, right? Business scholarship community. And so asking the question, how do we tackle that problem of our own role from part of the problem to part of the solution? It's not a trivial question to ask. And what are obviously the changes that might be necessary in order to contribute to accelerate the transition of business, right, towards a healthier, sustainable, and just socioeconomic system, as you can see there, right? And then I will provide you some examples, of course, for my own work as director of the Leonardo Center here at Imperial College. And on the way, as you will see, I have put some slides with just questions, because that's where I would like to get your own input as well. So this is, sharing, of course, but I also want to learn from you guys. Now, on the problem side of things, as I said before, yes, of course, we all know that the private sector is either directly or indirectly a cause, right, for pretty much all the grand challenges that we are used to now study. However, guess who has over the last 80 years, century, provided knowledge and both in terms of scholarship and management development courses, learning, right, to the private sector. Well, that's us, right? That's what we have been doing for decades and decades. So as much as it pains us, I think it's really important to maintain also a mirror in front of us, and to really look at ourselves and the way that we are doing things and ask ourselves, is what we're doing fit for a purpose? Because if we define the purpose as, responding to societal needs and requirements on the conduct of business, then there are reasons to believe that we are not really that fit, at least not as much as we would like to believe. Now, of course, then the question is, how do we change, right? And so let me take this one at a time, right? So what do I mean by societal expectations, right? Is it really important? We know, right, that impact has been always a major problem. That's why RRBM exists, by the way, right? Responsible research in business and management. And by the way, I'm not talking about just a specific part of the business scholarship, right? It's not just management or marketing. I mean, this is the whole set of communities, right, across all the various key academies among the business kind of label. And yeah, they're all more or less suffer of the same problem, right? That in terms of really thinking about the kind of impact that we're having, yes, of course, we do have some impact, right? But it's very rare in terms of, vis-a-vis the production. I think there was an estimate of $2 billion only for management scholarship every year, right? What are we giving to society back in terms of return? On that is really hard to say, but it's also weak, right? It's intermediated primarily by consultancies and has hugely long delays, right? If you think about the time it takes from when you have an idea, right, and you start working on a research project to the time when you finish the research project, you write the paper, you send the paper to a journal, right? Then, of course, it depends, right? It can come back. You're lucky, maybe you get it in only a couple of years, but on average, it's longer than that. But then, what happens? It's published, yes. So that doesn't mean that it's part of the practice of business, right? So it has to be picked up maybe from some consultants. And then, they need to translate it and make it available to their clients and so on. I mean, someone made a computation. On average is 10 years on average gross, right? Could be faster, could be 7 or 8, but certainly, it's a really, really long time. So even if it does have an impact, it's really slow. And of course, by the way, if this is particularly problematic when you're tackling problems like, climate change and where the clock is ticking, incredibly fast. Then the other problem that I see is a fundamental, I think, cognitive bias, really. We are trained to think about research in our field exclusively almost in terms of studying what has happened, right? The past actions. Nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that there is another side of research which has to do with the co-creation of the future, right? Or testing the effectiveness of changes, right? Particularly in an applied science like business, this is absolutely essential. Imagine for a moment if medicine scholarship was only focused on studying past medicines or treatments or whatever surgical techniques, right? Without the experimental, without the looking forward and try new things together, obviously with the practitioners, that would be quite problematic, right, for society. And we tend to think that that's really not our business. But I would love to hear what you think, but this is really a major, major problem. Now, of course, we are getting a little bit better now. As I will say a few more things, obviously, on experimental design, particularly field experiments, but this fundamentally is still a huge issue that I see. Also, we don't leverage knowledge really, except for rare exceptions. Knowledge and methods of other sciences. I think among the business sciences, we are probably the last one to have, for instance, started to collaborate with neuroscientists to study what happens in the brain of managers when they're making decisions, or biologists to study the genetical antecedents. Yes, in entrepreneurship, there's a little bit of that, but very, very little. Again, vis-a-vis the rest, the total amount of work that is done on in our field. Of course, the way the processes, for our, think about the normal research project, right? That you're involved with, small team, micro team, really. I mean, if we have a team of 5, we consider it big. For in biology or in many most of the natural sciences, that would be like, what, you do research in teams of 3, 4, 5 people? I mean, how can you do that? Of course, they have labs and so on. They must have larger teams, but even it's not just the size, it's also the breadth of capabilities that are necessary in order to tackle major questions, right? We are not really again, trained or cognitively predisposed to think about our work as fundamentally being uh, complex and therefore needing, uh, complex teams and structures and organizational designs in order to come up with real solutions or responses, answers, right? And so no global collaborative programs. I can count them on I think one hand, right? How many real global projects we've had over the last 40, 50 years, so there's Globe, there's Stated, there's the, one on entrepreneurship. I mean, really, really, really few, right? Whereas it should be the norm, right? No longitudinal designs, right? In medicines, you have these amazing studies with 10,000 people followed, over the course of their life. We could do the same thing with companies, for God's sake. Longitudinal designs are particularly powerful in order to distill real insights. And then, of course, the influence on, going beyond business, right, to industrial policy, to regulation. We are not even present where these things are discussed. We attend the UN General Assembly. There's this Climate Week, for instance. There is the World Economic Forum. And you see, yeah, some academics, typically they tend to be economists, political scientists, or more recently, obviously, environmental scientists and so on. Almost no business scholars, maybe some deans, maybe rarely. But that's the situation. We don't have a voice, essentially. We're on the table where discussions and even decisions are made that actually directly connect, directly influence business. We're not there. We just don't exist. We don't have a voice. We don't have a presence. Sorry, I'm trying to be a bit, as I said, why is this? Okay. So what would then a fit for purpose business research look like? I mean, if this is the situation, and of course you can feel free to disagree, but if you think this is a reasonable description of the situation, then what do we do? What would be, in your view, the alternative? An alternative way of doing business research? Anybody? It's a serious question. 117 of you. If you're writing on the chat, let me tell you, I'm not reading the chat.
I
so
could read
yeah.
afterwards, but we have two open hands from Mr. Wagner and from
Okay.
Mr. Bryant.
Fantastic.
So
Go
please,
ahead.
Mr. Wagner.
Yep.
I think one thing would be to, instead of starting with theory and a lot of research and ending with theory, including a step beforehand where you engage with practitioners to kind of understand better what the issues actually are, and also going back to practice afterwards and really show and test and practice if the ideas that you've developed are actually working in practice. So there's kind of like two steps added in the beginning, at the end, to really make the research better fit for purpose in practice.
Thank you. Absolutely. We think alike. Who's the other one?
Maurizio, it's Peter Bryant. Hi.
Hey, hi, Peter.
Hey.
Go ahead.
There's been talk in other fields about big team science, in the social sciences, and psychologists and others in our related fields are moving in that direction. The thing that I find interesting is that we inhabit these very large, wonderful, multidisciplinary institutions, universities and business schools, which should not be that. I mean, they should be ready for that. So I think
What's
that
the barrier? What is it keeping us, you think?
Well,
from doing
there
that.
you go. There you go. I think the challenge of organizations in becoming more purpose-driven and ecosystem-friendly is also our challenge. I think it's got to do with our institutional purpose and our recognition of our ecosystem nature. So I think that's what it would look like. It would look like our universities as big team science centers.
Yeah, I take that point on purpose really at heart. I do agree that to some extent, well, not in the sense that the purpose is wrong. It's just that there is a big gap, as we see with companies, right? Between the espoused purpose and values and the reality of what of the way the system is actually designed to realize that purpose, right? So there is a misalignment. Maybe we can, we can synthesize it that way. There's a misalignment between purpose and everything else, right? Including governance, but strategy, actions, incentives, and so on. We can elaborate more. Anyone else?
There's two additional raised hands, Maurizio.
Go ahead.
David?
I'm David.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I can actually, this is Swapan. I can go first.
I'm sorry, Swapan. Maybe David. David was first.
Hello?
Yes, David.
Good day all, David speaking. I think a possible exploratory route could be to link research to action more. And of course, I'm thinking of experimental research, collecting data before having an intervention, collecting data after, and this would probably relate to this science done by medicine. And I think in the same line, action research is definitely interesting, and even more specifically, participatory action research.
Right. So about the experimental, what's the big deal? Why is it that we don't do, well, historically, we've never done real experimental research. Now, in the last few years, we're seeing a bit more. But what's the barrier? Why not? Why is it that business research is not an experimental science?
I would happily answer, but maybe it's better to spread the
Yeah,
speak
that's
time.
a bigger question. All right, thank you then. There was another hand up.
Yeah, Sapan, please.
Maybe I can try to.
You're still muted.
Oh, hi.
Yes.
My name is Swapan Ghosh. I am from Michigan State University. I worked in the industry for 25 years, and this is the first time I am actually teaching. What I could see that, the working with the practitioners, in my research, I mostly work with the practitioners, but the problem with our leading journals, if you look into our leading journals, they are looking, like say, Academy of Management journals, they are looking for, the papers very much related to theory and how you are expanding that. And whenever I submitted a paper in these elite journals, they told me that your papers are more practitioners oriented, you submit it in some other journal. So there is all of our elite journals, they need to realize that, some of the papers I read from there, I do not understand as a practitioner that what is any relevance of those papers for our industries. So I think there is some structural problem, and unless our academicians understand that, we won't be able to bridge any gap between academics and practitioners.
Right. And however, it's debatable whether the structural gap is in the journals that, after all, they're doing what they need to be doing, right? If they're focused, if their purpose is publishing, the highest quality of research. I mean, we could define the methodologies. We can do, hopefully there's plurality of methodological variety, but the problem I see, and I will elaborate on that, is that it's actually the schools and the incentive system for the institutions that does not give, in the context of evaluations and promotions and hiring decisions and so on, does not give enough weight perhaps to impact, right? It's a business
that is
that
absolute problem.
ours is a business that is fundamentally framed around rigor, which has to be there, but without enough. So the question is, how do we change also that, right? And yes, as already many of you, I'm going to move on because there are other points of conversation that I have put on the way, and mindful of time, obviously. So obviously field experimental design. So not all the experiments, by the way, right? I underline field for a number of reasons. First of all, because they force us to actually talk to companies, engage them, and design them in a way that are not just interesting for us and not for them, right? In order for them to open access, we need to learn how to frame our questions in a way that is actually strategically relevant also for them, because this is very intrusive, of course, right? And that's our capability to do that we have to develop. Also, the question of thinking about research in an engaged scholarship way, we'll say a few more things. Again, learning how to design programs also with other business domains and outside business scholarship is really important, particularly outside. Obviously, they already have a mindset for experimental design. They're much better than us. They've been, groomed and schooled to do that. finally, I would say we don't design for scalability, right? We basically only see the paper at the end of our of the project. Yeah, that's all. Most of the research projects I've seen, and if you think about what you do when you think about a research project, it's basically the outcome is the paper, the article, published on a journal, right, an academic journal, as good as possible. End of the story, right? And obviously that doesn't do anything for scaling the impact. So yes, we can point fingers to the institutions and the journals and so on and so forth, but it's also a design problem that we have in our heads because we don't think about that ahead of time. So let's also again resist the temptation to point fingers and actually think about what is it that we can do to avoid these problems also, because if we do it all of us together, obviously systemically we can maybe have an impact. So fit for purpose clearly has to do with the way we not only understand but put in practice, because engaged scholarship has a concept has been discussed now for a while. Andy van der Ven, bless his soul, wrote this wonderful book back in 2007, made a very strong case and gave a lot of input on how to do really engage business from the beginning, exactly. When we when we ask the question, the research question, exactly as I think it was David or one of you were saying before, but also all the way through, right? Also when we develop the surveys or the interviews or we search for the data, right? Secondary data that we want to do. Businesses can give us fundamental input throughout the process. Maybe not when we do the statistical analysis, okay? But when we have the results and we want to understand face validity of this and more importantly, the implications of the results, that's where again, business can provide that fundamental feedback also again to help us think about going beyond just the publication on the journal, right? Help us think about impacts, right? Because clearly that's what they care. And so this partnership has a number of implications as we know. The problem is, of course, to put it into practice. And so yes, in terms of asking questions, the access is critical, but to the extent we engage them, we have an understanding from the beginning, then the access and the longitudinal access can be guaranteed. And it's for us to being able to maintain the relationship, right, as long as possible. I mean, it can be many, many, many years. That, by the way, solves or at least attenuates significantly, I would say, also the other problem of the time to market, right? The 10 years window. Well, first of all, it's immediate, right? For the company that we're doing, or the companies with which we are doing engaged scholarship, they learn immediate as during the research process. Yeah. So that's already a form of impact. But even more when it comes to the research and making sense of the results and then writing the outputs and disseminating the insights, business can be an amazing partner, right? Their networks, their industry associations, their national bodies, the public policy, the relevant industrial policymakers, for instance, right? They can clearly distribute if they think that the results are actually important and useful. Voila, right? They work for us in that sense, right? Now, field experience, as I was saying, is critical across science, right? So again, I'm always puzzled by this question. was supposed to be, day one, right? At the first year of the Academy of Management, back in the 50s, it was supposed to be there, right? Because how can you not have field experiment in an applied science? How can you only look at what's been done without actually experimenting on possible alternative courses of action, right? Together with practitioners, by the way. I don't know. It really is beyond, right? I think there is unfortunately an ingrained cognitive bias here, right? That as we all know, at least those who study organizational behavior and applied psychology, it's damn difficult, right, to remove. But it better be done, right? And we're seeing signs of this, right? It is opening up. We see more and more papers, some even special issues, right? But there's a lot of work to be done here in terms of making it really one of the core instruments of our business, of our research. And by the way, it really matters in what is the level of analysis for field experiments. Individual, like for instance, what OB does, but also marketing, right? Individual level analysis is relatively simple. Yeah, you randomize on individuals and you allocate a particular treatment with a nice, active or passive control. It's not that difficult at the individual level. At the organizational level, it's already a bit more complex, right? So there are no field experiments that I know of, for instance, on corporate governance, right? We've been actually studying stakeholder governance recently with Ruth Aguilera and Pasquale Berrone, and we've been doing a literature review, and even the concept of stakeholder governance, but even corporate governance doesn't really have serious field experimental designs, right? Anyway, so there's a lot of work. And then, of course, systemic level, it's out of the question, right? That's a big issue, right? Because particularly when we study grand challenges, by definition, grand challenges are systemic issues, and they need to be tackled with systemic action, right? Collective action. Yes, there is work on this in other social sciences, of course. Ostrom did amazing, right? That's why she won the Nobel Prize. But we don't see an equivalent in business research, as far as I can tell. Now, there's also a question about how we do our business, how we construct, if you want, the whole process of doing our research, right? The cross-disciplinarity. I think about if you wanted to, oh my God, what's happening today? If you wanted to study the decarbonization of a sector, all right, maybe a hard to abate sector like chemical. What do I know about book and claim and new approaches, technologies to divide the chemical from the digital equivalent, right? The digital twin of the molecule of carbon, and trade the digital equivalents rather than making sure that it's actually connected to the molecule, the physical molecule. I mean, that's way outside, but that's exactly what we need, because to solve this problem, yes, you need the technical expertise from people in chemical or engineering, in chemistry and engineering, but it's also a question of business models, right? Business model innovation. So we have our own slice to bring to the table, but we can only bring it if we are part of the table, right? Part of the team, and if we know how to engage and are willing and able to engage. Obviously, cooperative engagement with, I will say a few more things about how to create stable arrangement between business, right? Research and business, right? The Marketing Science Institute, MSI, is a fantastic example. In marketing, they've created this institute where you have about 100 companies, large multinational companies now that pay, no, sorry, it's a bit less now. It's like 60 or so. But, you know, they pay annual fee to be part of the actually the governance body of this institute. There are another, I don't know, fairly large number of marketing senior scholars, and fees are used in order to do research calls for projects. Now, the questions are co-developed between academics and the businesses. And that's what are the calls for projects, proposals, and scholars, PhD students, junior, senior scholars in marketing. Every year, right, there's this call. They submit their proposals. They're screened. By the way, both science, right? So for rigor and relevance. And the selected ones are, you know, nicely supported to do this research. And by the way, what I'm told by our colleagues in marketing is that this is one of the clear sources of some of the breakthroughs, even in terms of importance of contributions, right? So it's not just relevant for businesses, it's actually been the source of really important advancement of marketing science. Yeah, something like that would be wonderful if we could create it overall for business. Obviously, the funding can be much more involved, involving businesses in this scenario, right? Particularly with the engaged scholarship and the field experimental designs and so on. And of course, the production of common goods, which goes beyond the article, right? The data, you know, platforms where, you know, companies, but also policymakers could access the data, the implications of the results. You know, it's basically creating additional forms of output over and above the written piece that can be not only done, particularly in large teams, but also then shared. So the European Union, for instance, they would typically provide very large grants for large groups of scholars, but they would require, you know, going beyond just the articles, right? They want to see artifacts of different form coming out of the consortium, right? Produced by the consortium of scholars and businesses, by the way. The EU is forcing scholars to really think about also engaged scholarship from the beginning to the end, right? UK as well, by the way. And then, of course, the question about sharing, you know, going beyond the UK. Again, that can be part of the business model. Sorry, beyond the business, right? As counterpart, engaging institutions, NGOs, and civil society, at least at the end of the process, right? When you have something to say and you want to not only diffuse, but also get feedback on the insights and the validity, and obviously generate eventually new ideas to go to the next levels. Okay, and now that I want to go, it's not moving. Okay, so now this is where basically we could be going, right? At least we have kind of at least some of the traits of what could be a way to do business research that, you know, is more fit for purpose. The question, of course, is how do we go from here to there? What are the barriers, as I was asking before, and what could be ways to reduce those barriers, eliminate? Some of this has already come up with. So maybe I'm going to go a little bit faster because things have already been emerged. The fundamental problem, in my view, is that there is no conversation about these questions even within academia, of course, business academia. Of course, even more important beyond, right? So in a way, our RBM has been trying, right, has been putting these questions about, relevant, responsible research, and that's why you're all here. And that's certainly a first step, but it can't be the only step, right? It requires a lot more, and it's been working on a number of these structural, a range of structural points, blocking points, barriers that need to be removed. Conferences across business scholarship areas, marketing and management and finance and operations, rare and certainly not engaged, not engaging the key, right, the most important associations, right, of academics. There might be other that are maybe less kind of less central, but they're absolutely essential. These type of joint conference would be fantastic if, especially, themes like the grand challenges need to be tackled. Other conferences, the same themes can be created, the same dedicated themes to this question, right, in our conferences. How do we create business research that is really fit for purpose? How do we change the way we're doing? There is some, as I said, but it's not mainstream. At least this is my reading. Specialist dedicated to this. All those things we all know is relatively straightforward. Now, what about the structural assessments? Particularly the structural barriers to the development of the more fitting business model, as I was saying before. You remember the conversation we just had, the fact that impact is not part of what academic journals are really aiming for, right? And and to some extent there's been change, but obviously we cannot really blame it too much on the editors, right? Because their role, right, their purpose is different. What I think needs to be brought to front is the fact that, as Peter was saying, the gap between what institutions are claiming they want to do and what actually is done when the key decisions are made, right? For instance, on how to set the incentives, how to promote and review essentially the performance of researchers. In many situations, unfortunately, we only have a dimension of rigor, which is necessary, no question, but it's not enough, right? And the relevance dimension, essentially, we are not even our institutions are not even set up to measure the impact of our articles, let alone align the incentives, right? You can't put an incentive if there is no serious metric, right? Measurement device. And there's a big debate, of course, on what would those assessment systems look like. what would be the metrics and what would be an appropriate set of targets, right, to achieve. But as of now, even especially the most advanced institutions in our field, the business schools, have not really significantly changed the way that they track impact and the way that embed impact in their evaluations. Senior scholars' KPIs, I can tell you, haven't changed, really. I think for decades now, it never changed really. It's extremely difficult to motivate people that have reached, full professorship. Either they have intrinsic motivation on impact, which is, very frequently the case, right? People, once they've published enough to get to full, typically I say, I don't care that much about having another, ASQ or SMJ or whatever, or Journal of Marketing. I really want to have impact, but again, is that valued? Is that something that the school is actually organized to support and to evaluate and to assess? That's really a big question. The way we train our students is, again, could be improved, at least by putting these fundamental questions, right, in foundational courses, by having them to not only go to take courses in other sciences, that's typically done, but for instance, joint team taught courses, for instance, on whatever, finance and neuroscience, or management and biology. Okay, that is extremely rare. Let's put it that way. Okay, I don't want to sound too much of a complaint. In fact, what I'm trying to do here is actually to try to be constructive. Back to this idea, and this is Ibrat, who's the organizer, one of the organizers of this, is also with me in the RRBM working board, and we've been discussing this, actually, this proposal to make well, take some of the best ideas from the MSI, right, the Marketing Science Institute, and create something for the whole business science, right? So across all the areas, and with that same type of logic, maybe we can make it a little bit, difference on some of the characteristics, but essentially having that element of stability in terms of the relationship between business, academia, and business, and replicate it maybe even across geographies, right? In different countries, in different regions. That model would actually create a very important breakthrough, if you want, right? It would help us change some of the, well, remove or at least attenuate some of the obstacles that we've been talking about. It would give us access to do, research like the field experiments that we were talking about before. It would give funding, maybe of significant magnitude. I mean, there's a number of potential advantages. So we'll see what happens, of course. And any other ideas? Let me stop here again and open it up. Questions or comments or suggestions? There are 45 in the chat. Wow. Let me see. Curious at this point. Anyone? Design science research as a research paradigm is a good approach. Thank you. Anyone? Any idea? Ostrom's? Yes, great. Novel winning research. It was not experimental. I guess it depends. Yes, it was not the experimentation that you have in the labs. There was no real randomization and control. A bit of control there was. Yes, they were doing research. They were controlled, but they were, the interventions that they were designing. It was certainly starting from observation, but actually they did interventions. Maybe not with the all the RCT kind of technology. You're right.
Maurizio, thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. We have one raised hand from David Kanat.
Oh, sorry. Well, if no one is having any feedback about doubts and questions, one of the challenges I'm facing is if my work is critical about organizations and about the power distribution in organizations in general. It might be quite a challenge to have access to the data I need. It might be quite difficult to have a lot of organizations join forces and do a fantastic work to turn their extractive organizations into cooperatives and nonprofits. So you see my point. The thing is, unfortunately, I think there is something that is really very difficult to do in the experimental world, which is the most radical and critical work.
Okay. So first of all, when I think about the reason why it would be difficult, right? We think about creating projects with large scale, so large number of companies with deep access, right? That's what we learn in PhD programs, right? 101, right? There is a trade-off between breadth and depth, and so on, right? That's only true because we take for granted that the design of our projects are done for small teams, right? Maybe one or two organizations, schools, or but with those constraints, yes, of course you have those trade-offs. That's precisely my point, that we haven't learned how to routinely think about building large-scale collaborative research. Yeah, because if that is the case, if we learned how to do that, like as I was saying, the European Union is set up to provide grants now anywhere between 5 and 10 million euros to consortia of business schools and businesses. Well, businesses are not getting paid, but business schools are, for large-scale programs, and that's where you get the possibility to go in depth and at the same time in a large number of organizations with the same protocol, so you can actually compare and contrast. So a lot of the trade-offs that we learn when we are PhDs can actually be significantly reduced, at least if we learned how to do large-scale global collaborative research, collaborative not only with other scholars, but with companies, right? That's our skill. That's a skill that we don't have. That's the problem, right? Like any trade-offs, they exist because there is a limit to the capabilities of the organization or the system, right? In this case, it's our community that hasn't developed those things. CERN in, close to Geneva, as you all know, right? That is a community of 3,000 scholars from very different walks. They are not all physicists, right? You have engineers and so on. And they've worked together for 20 years, actually a bit more, 25 years together to build the machine to run the experiments, okay? And then they all published together. Those articles are maybe 20 pages long, with 16, 17 pages of names of people and 3 or 4 pages of content. But those are big, big breakthrough. Of course, I'm not saying that we need to reach that extreme, but between 3 and 4 and, 3,000, as a community of collaborators, as a big, right, as a big continuum, right? So that's our self-imposed limitation, which obviously turns into a cognitive bias, unfortunately. Yep. Any other? Trying to healing solution. Oh yeah, the manager. Well, again, of course, we have different way of thinking, right? We as researchers and businesses or policymakers, we have very different way of thinking. That doesn't mean that we cannot collaborate if we go with the same, we've had, a joint understanding of the questions we want to have an answer to. And of course, then everyone has its own different type of contributions. Economists, Esther Duflo won another Nobel Prize, right? Very more recently, 2019. And it was all because she was able to convince governments to do randomized control trials with policy interventions. Yeah. So now explain it to me. If economists can do randomized control trials with countries, with governments, why can we not do it with companies again? Why? What is stopping us? We obviously haven't begun really, or maybe there have been, kind of scattered trials, right? Scattered examples, we're trying to figure it out. But fundamentally, it's a system, right? It's the way we as a community operate that still is not putting this front and center, right? It can be done. Absolutely can be done. And yeah, particularly we in management are behind. So marketing, for instance, are more advanced. They've been doing RCTs for a long time, right? Relatively easy because companies, of course, they want to understand what customers want and so on, right? So it's an easier thing. Talking about internal change, understanding internal things is a lot more demanding, but still. Any other ideas?
Yeah, we have one more hand from Slavomir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just feedback from my end because I spent 20 years in business and tried to collaborate with the universities actually, and we did not succeed. And why? Because business, so corporate when I worked in Unilever, by the way, and universities have completely different goals, objectives. And that's the reason.
Can you elaborate more? Because, when you think about large challenges, right? Grand challenges, for instance, both universities and businesses should have the same.
So business is focus on the short term, and that's how they think actually. And universities are like the more long-term orientated. So in my view, it was the first barriers. The second was that It's lack of the proper incentive scheme. So actually business, when it gets the funds from the European Union, that they collaborate with the universities. Once the grant, let's say, stopped, the collaboration also stopped. So that's the reality. And the third barrier
But
are
why?
the
Why is that? If they were willing to collaborate on a 3 to 5 year program with universities,
yeah.
why is it that it stops? Why can we not learn how to maintain that relationship and progress, right? Build on the research that we've done in this case, right? Is that not our capacity to manage the relationship with companies also?
I would assume that is the point also of mental models, really, because we as how I am in the academia, we have completely different mental models
Yep.
and business and in the business, in the corporates, you are on the roll, I know, 3 years, 5 years, and then you need to meet your targets, and that's your, let's say, how and that's your, let's say, objectives. In the academia, you can just work on the papers for, I don't know, years. Yeah, just the quality is the most important. In the business, not the quality is the most important objective, but yeah, value, yeah, and profit. Of course, currently corporates are more orientated on the value for the society. However, not in the degree how university is orientated in this direction. So mental models, and if I take the comparison of the iceberg metaphor, that is only a part of this, let's say, what we can see is the barrier, and below the water are the mental models, are the incentive schemes, are the objectives. Yeah, so these are, in my view, the barriers. And how to
How to change,
how
right?
to change. I
That's
didn't
what
I
we-
didn't succeed, so I could not be a good advisor. However, in my view, that should be the incentive scheme, yeah, which let's say encourage business to collaborate with the university. But once again, it is supported by the European funds. However, yeah. So the question is difficult and it's easy. It's easy because business does not see value. Yeah, that's very harsh, yeah, but that's the reality. On the other hand, academia should be, let's say, better. I would say, better understand the business needs. For this to happen, we should change the, let's say, the way how the academia is assessed. Yeah. So
So the incentives,
yeah,
absolutely, but also there's a question about process and how we do research, right? For instance,
yeah.
asking the questions that are not just important from a theory development standpoint, but also that are relevant, and design the research program to answer the questions not only for publication on ASQ, but also for impact, right? And developing different forms of impact, because that is of immediate relevance for our main counterparts, i.e. business, but also for government and society at large. So
Can I add on
go
to
ahead.
this? I just wanted to mention that I suppose that under multi-crisis umbrella, businesses will reassess the time-wise perspective, and especially because of the climate change and COVID-19, we have recognized that there is an increasing pressure from the stakeholders to the companies. So I couldn't say, especially in the carbon intensive industry like oil and gas, that companies really focus on only short-term goals, because they have to decarbonize at the same time. And that, of course, reveals in a paradoxical situation. However, we see the changing and another way of responses from the corporate towards grand challenges. And I think
so some of these industries are used to make research and development bets that are like 20 years, 30 years, right? If you
yeah.
want to create a new oil,
Mhm. Yeah, because they try to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, and of course,
they do
to
think long
mitigate
term.
the risks, they had to innovate something to meet the future demands of the stakeholders. So probably here, the multi-stakeholder approach will work because nowadays we don't have any other options to work. Otherwise, yeah. So
But
we
I
have
think it's also a question of proving that it works, right? So this is a model that, like all new models, innovative models, right? It hasn't really been tried. So there is no evidence, neither for us as academics, nor for them as businesses, that
Sure.
you can actually do this in a new way, in a different way, right? You need to prove, right? That's what experimentation is also about, right? To bring the evidence that actually a new model can work and can produce something that is useful not only for us but also for companies.
Yeah, and probably multi-level and multi-layered approach will work.
Yeah. Speaking of which, let me build on this actually to show a little bit of examples from my own work, and hopefully this will become a little bit more concrete, right? Because we've been talking very high level so far, right? So I'll be talking about ways to collaborate with other disciplines, for instance, with data, just some examples, not a lot. Mindset development, right? So different levels of analysis, as you were saying, right? So at the individual level, critical and collaboration there is absolutely essential, not only among us business scholars, but also with other sciences, organizational level, right? This question about alignment, right, of purpose with organizational traits. This is really, really important. And that's where actually we bring a lot of the value to the table, even in cross-disciplinary contexts, and the systemic innovation. That's where, again, it opens up to fantastic level of collaborations, potentially with social science, but also with other natural sciences and so on, engineering. And so I will provide you with a bit of examples, right? Given that we have about, oh my God, 16 minutes. Yeah, it's fine. I think we can do it. So data, this is how the center is actually being interesting. So the titles are dynamized by themselves. That's not what I. The mission, I think, is relatively fair, straightforward, right? To both understand and at the same time accelerate the business transition towards a regenerative society. We use the word regenerative to simply mean going beyond sustainability, going beyond the reduction or elimination of negative spillovers, and create essentially a net positive impact on both environmental and social dimensions, right, of the environment. And so the more, I think, interesting part is the strategy, right? The way we have synthesized our strategy is essentially to develop research insights to then be tested in real world labs, and then scaled, right, in terms of impact at the systemic level. And how do we do that? Well, we have essentially a structure which is really kind of a building on two methodological devices. One is a data lab, building a large scale data that we'll say a few more things about. And the other one is field experiments across both individual, organizational, sector, and country levels. I'm going to come back to this, but this is kind of the overarching story. So the data architecture is essentially, again, collaboration with our colleagues in this case in computing engineering. We had done without our colleagues back at Bocconi when I was, until 5 years ago. We had done a lot of qualitative and structured analysis, actually, of the of sustainability reports, about 1,200 of them over 5 years, training, graduate students to do that, and refining the protocol, doing all the tests and so on. And when I moved to Imperial, we started this collaboration with our colleagues in computing engineering, and we digitalized this. Right, we used it was about almost 100,000 sustainability initiatives. Right, so the key idea of this data set is that it's not so much the impact that matters, also because sustainability reports, do not really report on the impact on most of the things that companies do. What we are really missing is a structured, standardized way to identify and categorize the initiatives, the behaviors. And so we created this fairly complex set of algorithms to not only search for, now we have about 45,000 sustainability reports, but to read them to identify the text that describes an action that has already been taken by the company. So not future, not objectives or statements of intent. This is stuff that has already happened. And categorize that, as you will see. In fact, let me just in three major ways, right? One is the goals, right, using the SDGs. Another one is the type of behaviors, right? 14, we've created this taxonomy of 14 different types of behavior, and which we find is actually quite comprehensive, right? We cannot find initiatives that cannot be neatly allocated to any of this. And also the stakeholder class that benefits from that initiative. So now we have about 900,000 of these initiatives. 12,000 companies, starting from roughly 2000, year 2000, right? So fairly long time series. The interesting thing is that what this does, just this from a descriptive standpoint, it allows you to understand the company's allocation of effort to the goals, and with different types, with the type of approaches, right? We have clustered them in 5, right? One has to do with advocacy type of, philanthropic type of efforts, which, as you can see, it's almost a half of the total, right? 50%. So half of the actions in reports are this, right? 49%. Advocacy type of activities. The measurement part is also small, but important. Upskilling, anything from training, incentives, volunteerism, and adaptation. So organizational change. That's where it starts becoming even more kind of strategic, if you want, right? You have actually examples of changes in processes, in structures, the assets, the way things essentially are done inside the organization. And finally, innovation. So sustainability driven or SDG driven R&D investments or R&D outputs. And that, as you can see, is only 4 to 5%, right? So there is variance across sectors, of course, variance across geography, but this is what happens. The important thing is that this data set actually allowed us to study a number of important things that are fundamentally important outcomes, like in this case, it's emissions, and describe essentially the behavioral traits of companies, in this case, that are more or so they're aligned or not with Paris Agreement targets. So now we can tell why essentially some companies are or are not, right? And of course, those that are involved, that do more in innovation type of activity, they result to be, right? They're also the ones that are announcing aligned targets. Even in terms of SDGs, those that have more initiatives on SDG 7, right, which is energy, are the ones that seem to be the more higher likelihood of being the ones that that are more aligned, that issue aligned net zero strategies. Now, this has been published a couple of months ago on Nature Communication. The other, and this is not published, but this is a neat little study of the S&P 500 portfolio, right? So 500 companies over 12 years. We looked at all the main ESG ratings, no statistical difference. And whereas if you actually use the behavior to parse out and simply weight more certain type of companies that do a certain type of behavior, you have dramatically different results in terms of shareholder returns. So if you overweight by 10%, the companies that invest more initiatives in innovation compared to the industry average, the returns over the 12 years is 92% higher. If you instead overweight the companies that invest more than their peers in advocacy type of initiatives, right, the philanthropic stuff, you have a negative return vis-a-vis the index by 70% to the shareholders. You see the difference, for shareholders. This matters, therefore, not only the fact that we actually have a good mapping of the behavior matters not only for the environment and for society, of course, but also for shareholders in very, very clear ways. And it's the same companies, same company, same portfolio. There's just differences in weighting. The other thing we can do with this data is actually estimate optimal portfolio, optimal allocation for each sector. We estimated the allocation, across the SDGs and the type of behavior that results in, optimal, actually maximum financial performance together with, minimization of emissions. Okay, so a joint environmental and financial performance. Obviously, as you can imagine, you can do all sorts of other type of utility functions, but this is really important because it tells you clearly for each company in that particular sector, what is it they should invest more on and what is it they should invest less on, right? In terms of both the allocation to the various SDGs. So this is actually a quantitative version of the materiality story, but much more, objective rather than subjective assessment of what is important. And more importantly, it adds the behavioral component, right? This is actually where companies might, for example, have to do a lot less of the advocacy and a lot more on the innovation, for instance. The other thing, and this is now moving to the experimental part, right? Field experiments, the leadership lab. Actually, we also have now, we're starting to build a responsible consumer lab at the same level of analysis. Because the randomized controlled trials, as I was saying, is relatively simpler here, right? We actually are embedding in each of the executive programs as well as a normal teaching courses at Imperial. These measurements, pre and post, managing the assessment of different type of additional interventions beyond, for instance, the straightforward transfer of knowledge, right? So we've tried, brain training, we've tried deep meditative practice, which, by the way, so far is by far the most powerful, most impactful form of intervention, even without the knowledge, right? We've tried it, and we have a paper if you're interested. Even without the knowledge intervention, just learning how to meditate changes dramatically the business decision. We measured them with an MIT developed sustainability related business simulation. Actually, it's the one that Andy King, who's following this talk in a month, I think, co-developed with John Sturman, right? So it's very interesting to see how much this type of group compared to, for instance, the brain training group really has dramatically improved the business decisions to the extent to be actually very close to the sustainable outcome. So I'm mindful of time, which we don't have a lot. There's our number of, this is the enterprise lab. So now we are at the organizational level of analysis. There are a number of experimental designs that we're developing on governance, on incentives, supply chain. So without, in the interest of time, the reason why this is important is because we need to understand what, not only in general, what are the most effective change interventions in all the various dimensions that are relevant, obviously, right? And the dimensions are a number. We have a paper, it's a research report, really, where we've developed this framework, right? And we've identified for each of the dimensions, the various level of maturity, okay? That's it with the title. But the most important thing is to understand also not only how to assess the various levels, but what are the most effective ways to go from level 1 to level 2 or from level 3 to level 4, right? Clearly, the interventions will have to be different depending on the level of maturity where the company starts from, right? We have no clue as of today what to say, right? We might have some ideas, but this is where you see, this is where we need, a large scale collaborative effort, not only with businesses, but also among ourselves. Right? I'm going to have to probably skip the industry one because we're really, unless we can have maybe 5 more minutes. Is that okay? Diana, what do you think? 5 or 10 minutes?
I think, yes, we can do that.
Okay. So this is an example of the mobility ecosystem. where the problem was how to develop, again, the systemic business model innovation connected to the both environmental and social issues that are generated by the increasing size of the batteries, right, of the electric batteries. And the problem is not only from an environmental standpoint, because obviously you have large batteries, the weight of the car increases dramatically. Now it's 3 tons. Therefore, part of the battery is simply to carry itself, right? 1/3 of the weight is the battery itself in many models. But also 30% of the price is connected to the battery. So a sharing model, right, has been tried a few times. It always failed. Why battery sharing? Because simply it was not a systemic innovation, right? There was a company, a startup that tried to provide maybe important, interesting technical solution, but without the collaboration, right, the cooperation at the systemic level of all the key actors, as you can see there on the right side of the mobility system, and also the actors that are on the left side here, the systemic enablers, the banks and the company, the government, and so on as well. The various components of action, right, be over and above, of course, the technological innovation, needs to be put in place. And obviously, complementary assets need to be in place before you even start, right? And that's how you can, and this is what we're doing with again, a number of companies, not only the automotive, as I was saying, right? And in a particular context, by the way, in Vienna, we're discussing with the local authorities in Vienna. That's one of the most interesting. By the way, Austria, I learned, is actually one of the countries that are really considered, important test sites for mobility. And finally, I wanted to kind of give you a sense of how we're working in the country labs. So this is a collaboration with the World Bank. The World Bank is providing major funding to governments to enhance, to accelerate the sustainable development, right? And the idea then, we're currently working with, for instance, the government of Uzbekistan, and we're talking also to the Austrian government. The idea is to create a lab where basically you have a number of industries where, let's say, sector labs, right? Similar to this one, right? Where you have a problem in the mobility sector. But here, of course, it's at the country level. And so, the relevant companies are engaged in each of the verticals, right? Each of the sectors. And you have the same type of interventions, leveraging leadership mindset experiments, enterprise labs, what we've done, for instance, in corporate governance, circularity dimension, responsible consumption, right? One of the major systemic problems that actually connects most of the sectors have to do with, elimination of overconsumption, right? How do you do that without a coordinated efforts across, with all the relevant players in that sector, but also the enabling sector, like financial services, ICT, and energy. And then, of course, interventions also with policy, okay? This is my last one. I wanted to share also how we're thinking about scalability, because as I was saying before, we need to start learning how to design our research as business scholars not only for the size, right, in terms of plan, teams, not only with the impact, right, given equal importance of rigor, but also for the scalability of the results and even of the engagement, if you want, right, across the whole research process. And we're looking particularly at two types of scalabilities. There are a number of them. One has to do with digital scalability. So, for instance, both the leadership lab and the data lab are based on platforms, right? The data, so for sure, obviously, but also leadership development programs. By the way, one of which won the award last year from the best sustainability leadership program by the Financial Times. It's also, most of it is 90% of it is asynchronous, right? It's based on a platform and so on. So that makes it scalable. The other type of scalability is essentially relational or network scalability. That's where, of course, the systemic labs, like sector and country labs, are particularly strong. Not necessarily strong in terms of the digital. They could be supported by digital interventions, but of course they can generate the interest and connect with a large number of companies. The one that is weakest, right, is the enterprise lab, right, because it doesn't necessarily leverage neither network scalabilities nor digital scalabilities. It's kind of requires company by company, one by one, right? It requires established relationships. That's where the collaboration across institutions, right, across business schools or research centers, that's where essentially the coordination also with industry associations or institutes like the one that we were talking about before, right? Similar to the Marketing Science Institute. That's where it would really be important to create, to facilitate, to break these type of scalability kind of blockages. I want to stop here. There are a number of other things we've been thinking about. Obviously, there are synergies among all these types of labs, right? And and we are leveraging some of them, not all, right? So we are working now in creating connections, for instance, to help the enterprise lab scale, right? Leveraging both data, leadership, and systemic labs, right? Just to give you an example. But without further ado, why don't I stop the sharing and